Okay, we're up to siman mem aleph. Siman mem aleph deals with it's actually an interesting sugya whether you're allowed to have other things when you're wearing tefillin shel rosh, whether you're allowed to have other things on your head. Okay, we'll see it later on the Mishnah Berurah. He also addresses tefillin shel yad, but the Gemara deals with tefillin shel rosh, and here the Gemara says as follows. Actually, in Bava Metzia. Says, Amri devei anai letfilah uletfilin arba kabin. There's a shiur of arba kabin, which is relevant for both tefillah and tefillin. Arba kav is about, according to Orach Chaim, I think it's 1.38 liters. So arba kabin would be approximately 5 liters, right? As we know in Chazal, they don't really have measurements of weight. All their measurements are of volume, okay? Although in Achronim, sometimes they prefer to use measurements of weight because it's a bit more convenient. But anyway, you can translate the, if it's, so it's about 5 liters, or maybe a little bit more. So the Gemara says, well, what's the nafkamina? Letfilah ma'i, detanya noseh masoi al ktefo v'higia zman tfilah, pachot מארבעה קבין מפשילן לאחוריו ומתפלל, 4 קבין מניח על גבי קרקע ומתפלל. In other words, if you want to daven and you're carrying a load of 4 kabin, then you should sort of drape them over your back in daven. In other words, they can still be attached to you by some sort of strap, but they should be behind you. If it's a more significant weight of 4 kabin, then you should put it on the ground. So sometimes if you see somebody's carrying a very heavy backpack or something like that, they want to daven, really they should take it off. As Rashi here says, Shein kovdan moneh militkaven milibo. In other words, if it's a small backpack, so it's not very heavy, so it's not going to rupt your kavana, so then you can leave it on you. Again, you shouldn't have it in your hands in front of you, it should be behind you. But if it's a more significant, then you should take it off. Okay, לתפילין מהי? What's the nafkamina by תפילין? לתניא היה נושא מסוי על ראשו ותפילין בראשו, אם היו תפילין רוצצות אסור, ואם לאו מותר. Okay, as we know in the past and in some cultures still today, it's very common that things are carried on one's head. Okay, so if you have tefillin on your head, then im hayu tefillin rotzetzot. Rashi here explains rotzetzot nitma'achot tachat hamasa. In other words, if the weight is putting pressure on the tefillin, so that's prohibited. You should take the tefillin off. V'im lav mutar. Ve'eze masoy amro b'masoy shel 4 kabin. So in other words, if it's a load of, again, as we said, 4 kabin, approximately 5, a little more than 5 liters, and that's on your head, that's considered tefillin rotzetzot, that it's like brushing the tefillin, and then you should take off the tefillin. Dani Rabbi Chia, המוציא זבל על ראשו ותפילין בראשו, הרי זה לא יסלקם לצדדים ולא יקשרם במותניו, מפני שהוא נוהג במנקם ביזיון, אבל כל שם על זרועו במקום תפילין. But if you're carrying garbage on your head, so it seems that if it's garbage, then it doesn't matter if it's 4 kabin or even less, just the very fact that it's garbage, that's disrespectful to the tefillin, so you should take off the tefillin. And so where do you put them? Okay, so you shouldn't tie them to the waist. Rather, you should tie them where you tie the tefillin shel yad on your arm, and that's considered a respectful way to move them to, and not to have them on the same head as if you're carrying garbage on your head. Okay, משום דבי sheila אמרו, כאילו מטפחת שלהן אסור להניח על הראש שיש בו תפילין. According to דבי sheila, even just a mitpachat, just a handkerchief, is permitted. Mitpachat שלהן, according to the girsa that we have here, mitpachat שלהן, it seems like even if it's the mitpachat, which is used to cover the cloth, which is used to cover the tefillin, even that you're not allowed to have on your head, which when you have tefillin on it. Even something very small, a quarter of pumbedita. Here Rashi explains riva de riva litra. So a litra is 2 reviot. So we know a reviot according to our Chaim is about 86 milliliters. So it's about 172 milliliters. So you take a quarter of that, it's maybe 63 milliliters. Okay, in other words, even something very, very small, you cannot put on your head. Okay, now it seems like Pashtut Gemara is that Rabbi Sheila is arguing with the previous opinions, because according to The first opinion in the Gemara, Devei Rabbi Yanai, you only need to take off if it's for kabin. You can't have it on your head with tefillin, unless it's garbage, which even a small amount. But according to Devei Rabbi Sheila, even something smaller you can't have on your head with tefillin. In other words, you shouldn't have anything on your head on tefillin. Okay? And you see this is hinted in Rashi. He says, "V'chama yeh b'masoi v'yasur la'nichol rosho aliba de Rab Sheila." In other words, the Rab Sheila is disagreeing with the pretty opinions, and he's more machmir. He says even riva de riva, even something very small, you can't have on your head. Okay. Now this seems to be the pshat also in the Rambam. Okay, because if you look in the Rambam, when he brings us the halacha, he says, let's see Rambam. הנושא מסוי על ראשו, חולץ תפילין של ראש עד שיסיר המסוי מעליו. ואפילו המטפחת אסור להניח על הראש שיש בו תפילין. אבל צונף ומצנפתו על תפילה. Okay, in other words, he says somebody was carrying some sort of load on his head, he must remove his tefillin until he takes the load off his head. And if even a cloth it is prohibited to put on the head that has on a tefillin, in other words, the only thing that he's allowed to have on is some sort of hat that he usually wears. Okay, so you see from the Rambam, he doesn't bring anything about he doesn't bring anything about Arba Kabin or anything of the sort. He basically says you can't have anything on your head. However, the only thing the Rambam allows is like a hat. In other words, why? Because a hat, that's something that's normally on your head. It's to cover your head, so that's okay to have that with tefillin. But any type of weight that you're carrying, that's prohibited. Okay? That's also what Rabbeinu Yonah says. First of all, he brings another girsa instead of mitpachot shelahem. Some have the girsa of mitpachot shelechem. Okay, in other words, it's some sort of cloth used to cover food, whatever. And if you take that on your head, that's prohibited. However, Rabbeinu also says there's really a machloket here in the Gemara. And however, he asks, the Rif brings the opinions of before, of Rabbi Yana and Rabbi Chia. And he asked on the Rabbeinu Yonah, he says, Teima hu ala Rivzal, שהביאה ברייתא למעלה, דאמרינן באיזה מסוי אמרו על הבאה קבין. דאח הפסק הלכה כבאי לחומרא, דאפילו ריבא דריבא דפומבדיתא אסור. ולא היה לכתוב אלא זו שבזה נדחה אותה הברייתא, שסוברת שאינו אסור עליה בארבעה קבין. Okay, so he says, the Rif is difficult, because if there's really a machloket here in the Gemara, and Rabbi Sheila disagrees with these previous opinions, then the Rif shouldn't have brought them, just like the Rambam. The Rambam only brought Rabbi Sheila, who said even a cloth is prohibited to have on your head. If you have tefillin on, you have to take tefillin on until you take it off, whatever it is you're covering on your head. Okay, now this difficulty that Rabbeinu Yonah quotes and in the Rif, we also have in the Tur. Okay, because if we go to the Tur, he also brings everything in the Gemara, even though it seems contradictory. He starts off, he says, הנושא מסוי של ארבעה קבין בראשו, ותפילין בראשו, אם נדחקות מפני המסוי, אסור, ואם לאו מותר. Okay, in other words, he starts off by saying that if you're carrying a load of 4 kabin on your head and therefore it's crushing the tefillin, you have to remove it. Okay, המוציא זבל בראשו, אסור לו להניח תפילה בראשו. Garbage you can't have on your head. שכח שהיו בראשו, אפילו אם ירצה לצרכן צדדין, אינו רשאי לקשרים בזו מכאן תפילין. Can't even move the tefillin to the side, you have to take them off and tie it to your arm. And then he says at the end, אפילו מטפחת של תפילין, אסור להניח בראשו, שיש לו תפילין, בראשו, אבל דבר שדרכו ניתן בראשו, כגון מצלפת או כף המותר. So in the end of the Tur, he says exactly like the Rambam, that even a cloth is prohibited to put on your head, unless it's like a hat, which is designed to be on your head. And on the beginning, he said, no, only if it's arba kabin, it's prohibited because it's brushing the tefillin, or only if it's garbage. Okay, so what's going on here? Is everything prohibited except for like a hat, which is designed to be on the head, not as a load that you're carrying? Or is it only something which is like for kabin or garbage? That's what's prohibited. Okay, so that's the difficulty we have here in the tour. And the Beit Yosef gives several answers to these questions. There's enough community these answers, at least according to some of the Achronim that follow this. So he gives several answers. First answer he quotes from the Maria Buhav, and he says, שאין אלא מאמרים חולקים, שמה שאמרו הנושא מסוי הוא כשזה האיש נושא מסוי על ראשו בדיעבד. וכיוון שנשא לו מטריחין על שיעזבנו מן התפילין מתחלקים מפני המסוי. ואפשר גם כן שאפילו לכתחילה לחלק בזה שמי שמסתכר במקום יש לו מקום לעשות זה אם אין התפילין נתחלקים, מה שאין כן למי ששם על ראשו ללא תכלית. In other words, he says as follows. There's a difference between lechatchila and b'diavad. Lechatchila, you shouldn't have anything on your head while you're wearing tefillin. B'diavad, if you already have something on your head or you need it for work because that's your work, you're like a porter and you carry things on your head, then by that we're more lenient and we say no, only if it's like brushing the tefillin and it's arba kabin. Okay, so that's one answer, sort of distinguishing between lechatchila b'diavad, or whether there's a tzorech or there isn't a tzorech. Okay, second answer that he brings, the Beit Yosef, which is similar to the first answer, he says, "V'ni nirad mefashar mefashim de Rabbi Yana Rabbi Chia Ma'iri b'mi shehu היה נושא מסור על ראשו ורוצה להניח תפילין, וכמה רבי ינא שהוא פחות מארבע קבין מותר ומארבע קבין אסור." Okay, however, ורבי שיילה היכה שהתפילין מונחים בראשו וכאמר דאסור לתת עליהם אפילו מטפחת שלהם משום ביזיון. In other words, he says as follows. If you first have the load on your head and you want to now put on tefillin, you can put on tefillin as long as it's not crushing the tefillin. However, if the tefillin were there first, then now to come and place on your head when there's already tefillin on it, something that's disrespectful to the tefillin, and that even if it's a small item, you shouldn't. Okay, so in other words, according to this answer to the Beit Yosef, it depends which came first. If the load came first, then you're allowed to put on tefillin as long as they won't be crushed. If the tefillin came first, that's more disrespectful. Then I'll put something else on your head, and then that's prohibited. Okay. That's the second answer that he brings. Third answer that he quotes is it depends if the load is touching the tefillin or not. If it's not touching the tefillin, then it depends how big the load is. If it's arba'a kabin, then even if it's not touching the tefillin, in all likelihood it's going to somehow touch them. However, if it's a smaller than that and it's not touching the tefillin, it's fine but if it's touching the tefillin, that even a very small thing, a mitpachat, is prohibited. That's the third answer. And then he brings a fourth answer from Rabbi Yosef al-Alexandri, that he says that there's a difference between whether the load is actually on your head or it's just tied with like a rope to your head. If the load is actually on your head, that's prohibited, like the Rambam says, like Rabbi Shela says, even something small. However, if the load is just tied with a rope to your head, that's what he says here, then it depends how big it is, okay, or whether it's garbage. Okay, this explanation is sort of based on the concept of tefillah. Why? Because by tefillah, we have the same concept. You can have it hanging from your back during tefillah, unless it's too heavy. He says the same thing by tefillin. You can have it hanging from your head with some sort of strap or rope or something, unless it's too heavy. Okay, so all these answers are trying to work out, how to resolve the contradiction here by the two are bringing all of this in halacha. Okay, let's see what happens in the Shulchan Aruch. So the Shulchan Aruch says, "Anoseh masoy al rosho." Oh, there's a fifth answer. I'm sorry, I forgot. Of the Darkei Moshe, he says, "V'li nired elail ma'iri shedarko bekach lisam masa beraso, אפילו הכי אסור כשהוא ארבע קבין. אבל דבר שאין דרכו ליטט על ראשו, אפילו כל שהוא אסור, וזה נראה לי נכון, לכן כתב הטור מיד אבל דבר שדרכו. In other words, according to Darkei Moshe, it all depends on whether it's something that you regularly have on your head or not. Okay? He's basing this on what the Rambam says of a hat. Hat is something that you regularly have on your head, so that's permitted. So the Darkei Moshe is extending that to any type of load that you normally carry on your head. It's permitted as long as it's not arba'a kabin. Okay, if it's something that you normally don't carry on your head, that's prohibited. Again, this is a bit difficult. Why? Because a hat is not even load. A hat is just like clothing that you wear. That's definitely not disrespectful to the tefillin, as opposed to even if it's something that, let's say, every day you go to work with something on your head, your laptop on your head or something, you could still make the argument that even though you normally carry it, again, it would still be disrespectful to have it on together with the tefillin. Okay, let's see the Mishnah Bura, the Shulchan Aruch first. So the Mechaber says, הנושא מסוי על ראשו חולץ תפילין של הראש עד שיוסיר המסוי, ואפילו מטפחתו אסור להניח על הראש שיש בו תפילין, אבל דבר שדרכו ליתן בראשו כגון כובע ומצנפת מותר. Okay, so the Mechaber just rules like the Rambam. He says, forget about the Arba Kabin, forget about everything. You shouldn't have anything on your head. And if you're putting something on your head, then you should take off the tefillin. The only thing you can have on your head together with a tefillin is like a kova, a mitznefet. Okay, so we can have a kippah on, we can have a hat on, we can have a turban on, or whatever it is, together with a tefillin. Okay, the Ramado says, Hagav, afilu achi u'masoi kaved dalet kabin v'tefillin nitchakot tzarich lasiran. So the Rama here, the Pashtu, is lishitato of what he said in the Darkei Moshe, that if it's a davar shedarko liten rosho, even if it's not a hat, it's just something that you normally carry on your head, it's permitted. And therefore he says, if it's something really big of a arba kabin, and it's pushing off the tefillin, then you need to remove it. Okay, the Mishnah Berurah here brings a few other nafkaminot. He says, ואם הוא נושא מסוי על ידו במקום תפילין, דמסתם המכוסים הן ולאי כגנאי אין צריך לחנוץ, כי אם בשיש במסע ארבע קבין, ואז מסתם התפילין רוצצות על ידי זה. He says, we don't have the same problem with tefillin shel yad. You can carry something in your hands even when you're wearing tefillin shel yad. Why? Because since the tefillin are covered, that's what makes it different from tefillin shel rosh. So therefore, it's not disrespectful to the tefillin to carry something in your hands when you're wearing tefillin. Unless, again, it's something very big and it's crushing the tefillin, then that would also be prohibited by tefillin shel yad. Here he quotes, in Sif Katan Gimel, he quotes from the Pri Megadim. The Pri Megadim says, ואם יכול לסלק המסוי לצדדים שלו במקום התפילין, משהו עם פרי גנים מותר. In other words, according to the Pri Megadim, even if you have something on your head, if you can move it to the side so that it won't touch the tefillin, it's permitted. Okay, here in the Der Halacha, he says this is based on that one teirutz on the Beit Yosef that said that there's a difference between whether it's touching the tefillin or not, but he says, according to the Rambam, there's no such distinction. Whether it's touching the tefillin or not, it's prohibited, and it seems like he says that that's the way we should pass him. Regarding the hat, he says, in other words, even if the hat is sitting on the tefillin, it's permitted, because again, it's not the bizayon, because it's not a load that you're carrying from place to place. It's a garment that you're wearing. He says, in other words, if you have, I don't know, very big, some sort of very big hat, you should make sure that it won't move the tefillin from its spot. Okay, any comments or questions on that? All right, thankfully we're not carrying too many loads on our heads, so it usually shouldn't be an issue.
Is also based on this, the regular big rim hat is also fine, even if it's covering the tefillin, right? Over.
Yeah, as long as it's not moving the tefillin out of its spot or something like that. Yeah. Again, because the svara is it something that I'm carrying from place to place, transporting something, or is it something that I'm wearing? It's very interesting. I forgot to mention this. The Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan only put on tefillin once a year. Why? Because he was so sensitive in his head that he had to always have it completely covered. Okay, and he would get sick if he would leave his head uncovered. So he only put on tefillin once a year. So Rabbeinu Yonah asked, according to the Rambam, what's the problem? You can wear a hat on top of the tefillin, so why couldn't he put on tefillin? So he says just the fact that the tefillin even would lift up a bit the head covering of Rabbi Yochanan, that would also make him sick. He was so sensitive, so that's why he couldn't. He was a patur from wearing tefillin, so he only put on.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Would this actually be a base for like a limit if somebody has like some skin conditions, like under the hair or something, which is very could be even become painful if the tefillin thread will rub the skin, to have it on like once every while or something, or
What, that story about Rabbi Yochanan?
yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if they can't find a solution to put on tefillin, then and the chinami. Here, I'll show it to you inside. That's exactly what.
Yeah. I mean, should such a person then daven b'yechidus, or that people won't start to talk about him? Only daven in the minyan where people know him.
So what? Because of kavod habriot that he's not wearing tefillin.
Yeah, that people will look at him strangely, whatever. Like, what's going on?
Maybe the question is, yeah, b'chora you can't have a chatzitza by tefillin shel rosh. Here, take, yeah, it could be. Here, let's see the Rabbeinu Yonah. He says as follows: ויש שמקשים עליו מדאמרינן בירושלמי, רבי יוחנן לא היה מניח תפילין אלא מפיסחא לפיסחא, והיה מחזיק לרישא מפיסחא ועד עצרתא. פירוש, רבי יוחנן היה חושש בראשו מקרירות, ומפני זה לא היה מניח תפילין אלא פעם אחת בשנה כדי שלא יזיק אותו, ואף על פי כן מפני אותו פעם בלבד היה חושש והיה צריך לחזק ראשו מפסח ועד עצרת. So every Pesach, I don't know exactly when, before Pesach, or I don't know if he's talking about or whatever it is, he would put on tefillin, and because of that, he had to sort of extra hold his head all the way to Shavuot. Okay, he was suffering from that one time that he would put on tefillin around Pesach. Okay,
That's also
yeah.
That's also a raya that you wear tefillin in Chol Hamoed.
Yeah, if he means actually during Pesach, it's approved for that you put on tefillin at Chol Hamoed. Although maybe you could argue, maybe that's why he kept getting sick, because he shouldn't have been over the Kabbalah. Okay? ואומרים, אם איתא דמותר לשום מצנפת או כובע על התפילין, למה לא היה משים אותו בכל יום וישים עליהם הכובע? Right? So you could have put on tefillin and then put on top of that the hat, ולא יהיה לו איזה. ואומר מורי הרב, that's רבינו יונה, שזו אינה קושייה, ומי שהיה לו חשש גדול כזה, שמפני פעם אחת היה צריך לחזק לראשו, מפסח ועד עצרת, גם כן היה חושש אפילו בכובע מצנפת, מפני שגובה התפילין מפסיק בין הכובע והראש, והרוח נכנס בינתיים ומזיק לו. אבל לשאר בני אדם ודאי מותר. Okay, in other words, for him, he was so sensitive, even if he would take off the hat just a little bit, just that space to put on tefillin, already the breeze would come in, and he would already be in pain for a few weeks. Okay, yeah, certainly this could apply to other situations as well, like you said, skin conditions or things of the sort. Okay, let's maybe just quickly start the next sugya and then we'll continue next week. Siman Mimbet is about switching tefillin from tefillin shel yad to tefillin shel rosh, or the reverse. So the Gemara says here as follows: תנו רבנן, כיצד כותבן? תפילין של יד כותבה על אור אחד, ואם כתבה בארבע אורות והניחה בבית אחד יצא וצריך לדבק. Okay, all right, won't get into that. Anyway, the Gemara says, שאם אין לו תפילין של יד ויש לו תפילין של ראש, שתולה אור על אחת מהן ומניחה. We know the difference between תפילין של יד ותפילין של ראש. תפילין של יד is in one box, and תפילין של ראש is four separate parshiyot in four separate boxes within the box of the tefillin shel rosh. However, if let's say I have two tefillin shel rosh, so I can convert one of them into a tefillin shel yad by covering it. We already mentioned this in the past. But now the Gemara asks a different problem. והיה שלח רב חנניה משמי דרבי יוחנן תפילין של יד עושה אותה של ראש ושל ראש אין עושים אותה של יד, לפי שאין מורידין מקדושה חמורה לקדושה קלה. In other words, תפילין של יד or ראש are considered to have a higher קדושה than תפילין של יד. So there's a different problem by making the tefillin shel rosh into tefillin shel yad. Even though you could cover it and turn it into sort of tefillin shel yad, you still can't do that because you're lowering it in kedusha. So the Gemara answers, Lo kashya ha be'atikta ha bechadeta. In other words, if it's old tefillin that they've already been worn, then they already have the status of tefillin shel rosh, and therefore you cannot make them into tefillin shel yad. However, if they're new, in other words, they've never been worn, even though they were made to be tefillin shel rosh, but they don't actually receive the kedusha until they actually are worn, and then if you never worn them, you can convert them to tefillin shel yad. The Gemara asks, "Ulemanda amar hazmana miltai." There's a sheet in the Gemara that says hazmana miltai, that the kedusha applies even just that you designated it for that purpose, even though you never actually used it for that purpose. The Gemara says for that, de'atni alau mi'ikara. In other words, he made a t'nai mechatchila that he would be able to convert it into tefillin shel yad. In other words, that if he will need them, he'll be able to convert them to tefillin shel yad, and that's why the hazmana of designating it to be a tefillin shel rosh is not prevent him from converting tefillin shel yad, because he made it al t'nai milchatchila that if he would want to, he could convert it to tefillin shel yad. Okay, well, we'll get into this in more detail next time. But you see here just the basic principle: A, that tefillin shel rosh have a higher kedusha than tefillin shel yad, and that even though if you want to use something for tefillin, you cannot do it in a way that you're learning the kedusha. That's why if it's already been used for tefillin shel rosh, you cannot convert it anymore into tefillin shel yad. Okay, so we'll stop here.